Hi everyone, I'm Danielle Byington, and in this video we're going to be talking about the poet Ted Hughes. In particular, we'll be talking about his poem Daffodils. Ted Hughes is one of the major English poets. He was poet laureate of the UK for from 1984 until 1998. Um, it's kind of a funny way that that worked out. If you're in my class, there are other poets we've covered in which this kind of comes full circle. Actually, in the year that it was offered to him in 1984, it was originally offered, the position of poet laureate, that is, offered to Philip Larkin. But if you watch my video on Philip Larkin, you see that he turns that down, which is like something no one ever does. He turns that down because he's just not, he doesn't vibe with that kind of fame. He's not into that. And so it goes to Ted Hughes. Now, Ted Hughes had been a prominent writer since at least the late 1960s, and certainly recognized even before that. But it is because of so this last bullet point that you have here. His wife was his first wife was Sylvia Plath, who is as famous as him, but she was an American poet. Unfortunately, you see on the timeline there that she's married to Plath until 1963. That's because of her untimely death. Um, you can look more into this on your own. I don't want to make all of this about her suicide, but because it was like something out of a Greek tragedy, the way in which she took her life, it and the background of their marriage, being on the rocks. They were going through a separation in the last 6 months of her life. People sort of pointed a finger at Hughes, saying that he was the reason that she did this, even though she had a quite a history of depression and had tried to take her life a couple of other times before even being married to him. He has even said in an interview once that, well, they got married after only knowing each other for something like 3 or 4 months, a very short amount of time. They fell in love in a similar, like, nice, charming way through reading each other's poetry, sort of like Elizabeth Barrett Browning and Robert Browning. But Ted Hughes said that, you know, even though in the first couple years of their 7 year marriage, they were happy, and they were a young married couple starting a family, and both were pursuing careers as being writers. They were happy in that context, but he describes there being sort of like chasms in their personalities, like the way their outlooks on life. She was very pessimistic, very quick to assume the worst, and become have depressive episodes because of this. She does experience hospitalization during their marriage. Well, that because there was sort of scandal looming over that when she did pass away in February of 1963. He gets like kind of low-key blacklisted in ways such as from maybe being asked to do things like being poet laureate for a long time. So that loss of Plath seems to come across in his work, specifically this collection that the poem Daffodils comes from, Birthday Letters, his last collection. This is assumed to have been written across 3 decades, and all of the poems in that collection are about his relationship with Plath as sort of survivor's guilt. Um, maybe cliche things you might say about that, like thinking, what could I have done? What could I have done to prevent this? Um, and also just a general grief. His very young children, a 2 year old and a child who was an even was almost a year old, or about a year old, now motherless. So the one of the ways in which you sort of see he navigates that grief and loss in this poem, especially by the end, it is sort of a theme that he had across the rest of like his whole body of work in his career as a poet. So for a while, had been labeled as like, oh, he's the guy who writes about animals and nature, and he was very successful as that. But he wanted to be thought of as a little more, like complexer than that, a little more intellectually, uh, sort of deeper than that, not just some animals and trees and mountains. So there is this point during his studies. So earlier on, I'm backing the biography up a bit. So the Plath bit takes up a large part of understanding what's going on in this poem, but this is important too. So back while he is a college student, so he does begin by majoring in English, and there are interviews where he talks about like he could just not focus to write the papers on those sorts of things, on those sorts of topics. And even though he enjoyed the content, he was a little more interested in being a writer, like doing and not just reading and analyzing. And I hate to tell you, but if you do go down the creative writing path, you can't become a better writer without reading other people's work. It's sort of like you can't become a better visual artist without looking at the artwork of other people, because your brain needs to take all of that in and see all these new patterns of things, and then your voice comes out in it. So anyhow, for a bit, he manages with the English major, but then he at one point switches to anthropology and archaeology. He was always very fascinated in history and sort of like almost like this Jungian thing of where do we come from as humankind? And you see that sort of like talking about literally the scissors being in the dirt in the end of the poem. There's this relic there from their marriage that's still there, and it's like this rusted memorial. So in the poem, as I said this just a moment ago, you have to know about the marriage, the relationship situation between the two poets for there to be an emotional depth to this poem, so you can understand why it's significant. I have filled you in on that mostly, but you are welcome to go read more about specifically Sylvia Plath in general. In the first line, he is addressing Sylvia Plath. He uses the pronoun we, like, we did this. Do you remember when we did this? And he's talking about when they were harvesting daffodils. And that might sound a little odd to us now. I mean, you might see things like that in maybe a farmer's market sometimes today, but it was just a thing that they did that particular spring. They harvested just hundreds of daffodils that were blooming and this on this property that they happened to buy in the previous few months. So in these last couple years of Plath's life, and it's the last few months of their marriage before separation, it's in August, about the last third of 1961. So that's late, going into late summer, right? And so in September, you have the beginning of fall. They would have had no idea that they were sitting on this mountain, an absolute mountain of apparently daffodil bulbs that have been planted in the ground all over the property over time from previous people who previously resided there. And so spring comes, and in March, that's if you have seen daffodils in real life, that's when you start to see them come up. I think there are some on campus here where you're taking the class. And so all at once, just oh my goodness, there are hundreds, and that he describes how there are so many. It's as if they don't even just come out of the ground. It's like they're falling out of the sky because they are just everywhere. And they, as much as they can thin them and harvest them and sell them for 7 pence a dozen, more and more just keep coming up and blooming. So it's just this like almost bizarre situation, but you can imagine how this would also be almost like ethereal. You're just in this massive sort of field of daffodils, of these bright yellow flowers, and you had no idea that they were there all along. He's addressing Plath and asking her early on if she remembers this. And, of course, this is like him addressing her posthumously. She's been deceased since 1963. And the collection is published in 1998, but he could have been working on this poem over sometime since the 70s, since about the 70s. And he's wanting to know if she remembers, and he says he's kind of feeling like he's the only one who remembers, because even their 2-year-old daughter doesn't remember, because you usually don't remember things from when you're 2 years old. And then there's this even like more somber note that the daughter is not only forgotten, carrying all the daffodils in her little arms, but she also doesn't remember her mother, not even like this unique moment of being in this among all these daffodils. So we've talked about how it's incidental. So they purchased this property in the countryside in Devon, England. And you can look at this on Google Maps. It's by St. Peter's Church off in Devon, England. But you can't see it well enough, or the image wasn't captured during a season when the daffodils are blooming. Now, you have them just like kind of laboring away. Let me go back one. He describes them, he and Plath, for several lines, 17 through 44, that it's like they're working for someone else because they're just so set on harvesting all these daffodils to sell. And before this, he's even questioning, why did we sell them? Why did we cut all those flowers and sell them? Were we that desperate for money? And he recognizes that they were a young married couple and they had two very young children. So yeah, they wanted to make extra money to keep food on the table and such. But when he's talking about Plath specifically, her, not him, harvesting the flowers, he's also looking at the memory as recognizing it as her last April that she would have alive. Now, in the short little description of about 4 lines or so, in lines 45 through 49, we shift from the collecting of the daffodils and everything they are doing and collecting those, the farming of the flowers, to this almost like archaic description of the daffodils themselves. They're described as having this, as if that sort of trumpet in the center of the bloom of the daffodils, like it comes out, and he describes it as being this like an icy breath. And there's a lot of like coldness descriptions associated with that, like it comes from a grave from far away. That can be connected to Plath's death, but also this is again kind of related to his anthropology, archaeology background. He's kind of making them out as if they are this otherworldly thing, like they're ancient, but also think of the time of year when daffodils do bloom. And right there in the earliest parts of spring, sometimes where you might be taking this course in the southeast, sometimes we still have snow that happens in March. So this is all the way in England that he's talking about. So it still would be icy and cold when these flowers are coming up out of the ground. And then in the one line in particular, in line 52, you have the thing really kind of holding the poem together. And it's interesting because it's like it's literal and it's figurative. The scissors, but the scissors are open. He describes them as being open like a cross in the end. And so he is saying that no, although these scissors were a wedding gift. So they must have been pretty nice scissors, right? And well, this is the early 1960s. There isn't like a dollar store you can go to go buy some cheap scissors. So they have some decent scissors. Someone gave them, probably with some other similar supplies for their wedding. And they've been using this to cut the flowers, but she accidentally lost them at some point in all that overgrowth of flowers. You could imagine how that could be easy to lose them. If you've ever been in a thick field of tulips or daffodils, the way that they are pretty leafy at the base near the ground. So he says, if you remember, like I just mentioned earlier in the beginning, he fears he is the only one that remembers this moment. And he says, even the daffodils that have been coming up again and again ever since even after she passed away in 1963, they still come up every March. And even though they do come back, he says the daffodils come back and they don't remember you. They don't remember this moment, but the scissors are still there somewhere and they remember this moment. So it's like a cross. It's kind of reminds me of if you're driving down a highway somewhere or a two-lane road, whatever it is, and you'll see like a random marker. Maybe it is a cross, or maybe it's a wreath of flowers, and it's like a little memorial just marking that someone passed away in a car accident right there at that spot. And so it's kind of like they're like that was the last time that they were happy together in their marriage. And that was sort of like the scissors are like the thing, like this thing that could sever their tie, but the scissors aren't closed. They've just been opened. Like the tie was never actually severed. But this is the last, this wonderful, like heartwarming moment he has. One of the last memories he has of her like this. So that's all for this video. Thank you for watching.